From the inception of the genre, we have seen it go from 2D MUDs to 3D theme park and sandbox MMOs. With everything from dark fantasy, sci-fi, gothic, pretty much anything you can name, they have done it. For fans of MMOs back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it's kinda like seeing a child grow up. The genre begins and the child is born. This child is loved by its parents as its parents begin doing their absolute best to raise it, and the parents in this case could be seen as the developers, let's say. As the child begins to take its first few steps and say its first few words, the parents are filled with endless amounts of joy. The game is growing. At these times, the baby is being nurtured by its parents so that it can grow into a mature human later on in its life. Everything the child does is cute, and the parents raise the child how they see it fit. The same way that the developers carve its early etches into its game into like the certain mechanics and systems that they see best. Eventually, the child has grown some years to where they can actually start to function a bit on its own, and by function I mean such as walk, talk, and eat without being fed to, and things of that nature. This could be seen as the stages where a game's development begins to roll with momentum, because you have the foundation set of its core features and mechanics, and now it's building the story, the special content, and extra added features. This is a crucial part of development because at this point, the amount of money and time put into the identification of the current game is usually the defining factor if it goes to continue to be made or if it needs restructuring at its core. The child continues to experience life, socially interact, and although it probably doesn't know it yet, much like the game finding its identification, the child too is finding theirs. Now, we are looking at this as if the developers are a good core group of people with a strong leader, but this is a product and not the kid. That would be strange, but the game is what I'm talking about when it comes to the product. Developers are often seeking out investors to help fund the game, and it is actually where a lot of the issues are sprung from with MMO development. The investors have different motives than the developers, obviously, which is to not only make their money back, but also profit off of the game in the future. This becomes the problem for developers because they have given a piece of the pie away, and sometimes to either too many investors, splitting that piece of pie or that pie in general into thin slices, or a lot of the pie is given away to one large investor who will now implement certain systems and services in order to guarantee at least their initial investment back for the future. This cycle has plagued the MMO industry for, well, pretty much after a company saw how successful World of Warcraft could be in a new genre. They wanted to put money into a company that they believed had what it takes to not only take down World of Warcraft at that #1 spot, but also be there for years to come. The problem was that the investors didn't, and probably still don't, realize the amount of time it takes for an MMO to be ready. And by ready, I mean ready, not early access ready or the old, this is going out and it actually should be a closed beta. What we saw to come after the success of World of Warcraft was MMOs given millions, tens of millions, and even up to a couple hundred of millions in investments. These MMOs range from pretty dull free-to-play games all the way to the AAA MMOs that were being deemed the quote-unquote WoW killer at the time. But what usually became their downfall were those investors and also the publishers taking control of the game. Developers have a vision in mind, and they hope to put together a game that can garner a good amount of players. Maybe it could be a niche title or one that has a consistent larger population like we saw with World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, ESO, or even Albion to this current day. But where other MMOs saw problems like Warhammer, Rift, or even ArcAge is how much of the control is taken away from a well-developed game and put into the hands of the publishers and the investors. Understandably, the game needs to make its initial investments back, as well as they need to turn a profit, but I think that the investors just saw World of Warcraft as the norm, and they assume that there is easy money to be made with MMOs. Developers were able to get investors to help fund their game, but when the money started to run out, the investors and the publishers looked to push the game out so that they can get a return on their investment or even stop the game from dying before release. If that became the case, the MMOs were pretty much foregoing the last year's worth of, let's say, polishing certain features, systems, and even game mechanics because they were being pushed to a release. This ruins the game harshly because not only is the game not done, well, I shouldn't say done because an MMO really shouldn't ever be done until it is closed, more so ready for a release. Now that the investors have more control, they will slowly introduce ways to get their money back, which will be seen with microtransactions. Essentially, this has become the largest problem for the current state of the genre. We had years of tons of big AAA MMOs getting releases, but each one weren't really able to help players just getting into the genre stay around. And now we're at the point that microtransactions are a standard with MMOs, as well as having the option to pay a monthly sub, which usually gives you certain benefits. The buy a box and pay a monthly sub has gone away for the most part. I mean, WoW is still WoW, and well, Black Desert and some other games are still doing it as well, but mostly MMOs can't really pull the box and the sub fee for new players of the genre, or even veterans who have played most of the MMOs before. Now, what we see so largely are these crowd-funded games that get Kickstarters in order to seek out funds from potential fans or players. When this first started, I believe in 2009, I was excited for indie developers and smaller companies to be able to get help, but as of 2020, it kind of looks like a mess with certain MMO titles using them. I think we can all agree that when we look at Chronicles of Valyria, it puts a bad taste in MMO fans' mouths because of one true scumbag, who is, by the way, trying to suck more money out of the people who have already given money to the quote-unquote company, despite the company not really having any more developers because he fired them all. I don't really know what's good with that guy, and please do not give any more money to this scumbag. Nonetheless, on the other hand, there have been successful efforts, and while I think Star Citizen will be quite the game when it is released, I don't think that day will come until probably 2028. The other successful efforts I would like to point out are like Pantheon, Camelot Unchained, Ashes of Creation, Crowfall, among others that can hopefully be something worth playing in the future. Now, the problem with games like this is their games will be in a playable early access state for those who have given a certain amount of money to the crowdfund, which also has been seen something that I believe hurts the industry: its image and how games are released. Games are choosing to do this as a way to get extra funds, but the problem is now that games are being revealed at every single step of the way. The hype for the release isn't the same if there was a slower process, such as releasing a trailer, going through its NDA alpha, a closed beta, an open beta, and then finally releasing. The process that games used to do back in the day. We as fans can no longer get hyped for a release. And now larger companies are second guessing investing into larger MMOs because of how other MMOs economically turned out in the past. So if we look at the scope of the games that are announced for the future, what is currently out, and what has come before this point in over the past, let's say 23 years or so since the inception of the genre, the games that we used to love have come to a point of familiarity. We have lived with them for years, made friends within them, maybe even met significant others in them. But unfortunately, we as humans evolve, and other responsibilities set in that affect our time to play, or on the other side, those systems and game mechanics within the games that were once fresh and unique have kind of become standard and dull over time. I think the best example is with classic World of Warcraft, and while I think it's still exciting to play it and experience that, but we knew it wouldn't be the same because of where we were in our lives at the time of when we played vanilla versus where we are now with gaming, as well as in our personal lives. On the other hand, if we look at MMOs that are getting released present day, they're filled with more of the same. When it comes to their mechanics and their approach and gameplay wise, it's hard to get hyped with them because of their early access flaws that I spoke about before. Now, what about the future of the genre? Is it dead, or is it even dying? No, I think we see that companies who truly wanted to create MMOs do so, and they had their success with it. And those who are bogged down by investors or developers looking for quick cash grabs will see that it takes a lot more than a 2 or 3 year development cycle and a couple of $1 million to be able to have an MMO worth being put up against the juggernauts of the industry. But I do think we're going to see the early access phase stay for quite some time. And while I'm not mad about that, because I would love to support companies worth supporting, but when we get a Chronicles of Valyria, it definitely hurts the genre as a whole. I would love to see more MMOs being released, especially larger AAA ones, but given how the early access these phases have been going, it makes sense for them to do it the way that they're doing it currently. So after all of that, I guess if there were to be a conclusion of some sorts, if the genre is dead and or if it's dying, the answer I still believe is no. And you're gonna say, oh, what a clickbait. I'm just saying the genre is finding itself where it may be just off the beaten path a little bit, just like grime was for a period of time before German Whip came out and got the grime MCs back for making pop tunes. Now if you get that joke, you get it. If not, just know that I think it's gonna find itself in the near future. I believe we will see a resurgence in larger releases in possibly 6 to 8 years after the success of early access, being able to show developers what can happen for smaller companies, and then hopefully smarter investors will be involved with developers for the future. What do you guys think? Is the genre dying or is it already dead? Let me know in the comments, and also what other games you want me to cover. With that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one.